Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. Our top story this hour, Nigeria is now ranked at 131st globally on the World Bank Ease of Doing Business ranking, moving 15 places from its 2019 spot. The Bretton Woods Institution made this known in its report released in the early hours of Thursday. A comparison of business regulation in 190 countries across the world formed the basis of the ranking. In an earlier statement released, the World Bank had named Nigeria as one of the top 20 ease of doing business reformers across the world. The report says Nigeria is part of the top 10 reformers globally. Apart from Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Togo, Bahrain, Tajikistan, Pakistan, Kuwait, China, and India were also named as part of the top 10 reformers globally. Congratulations to Nigeria, and specifically Dr. Jumoke Oduwole and her team. She was our guest a couple of weeks ago, and we congratulated her then on being in the top 10 reformers. So this is good news that we're moving up the ranks, but I still think it's a bit sad that there are only 2 sub-Saharan countries in the top 50 of the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report. So we do hope at some point we crack the top 50. It's a Herculean task since we still don't have our power supply, and that's one of the bases. So there's only so much they can do, the PEBEC, with regards to trying to shorten processes, cut back a lot of red tape if we don't have fundamentals like power.
Absolutely.
Well, you are right. There is still a lot that we need to do, but first we must know that it's not a new story. On September 28th, the World Bank had made a preliminary announcement, and it was on the basis of that that we invited here Jumoke Oduwole, the Executive Secretary of the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC. But now, at the time, it was said that the World Bank will make the official announcement on October 24. So we already knew this story, and I think it's some form of achievement. But you must remember that when we had Dr. Oduwole here, she admitted that the report is based on the 2 big commercial cities in Nigeria, Kano and Lagos. And, it's also an acknowledgement of the reforms that the Buhari administration had embarked upon in terms of reforming, the business environment. And 6 indicators were adopted. Amongst them, trading across borders, the processing of contracts, property, access to property. These are some of the indicators. Access to electricity also, which, Jumoke Oduwole said the Nigerian government had been working on. But of course, the expectation of the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council is that by 2023, that Nigeria will be part of the top 70 globally. But as you said, yes, congratulations, both to the Buhari administration and to PEBEC for realizing that, ease of doing business is important. But there are still many challenges in the country. I think security is one of them. When we had Dr. Oduwole here, she and the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they didn't admit that security could be a big threat. In fact, yes. In fact, Mr. Owashe was even saying that in some situations, insecurity promotes business. But I think that the security challenge will need to be addressed. The problem of infrastructure will still have to be addressed. The legal framework for doing business also has to be addressed. Even as Oduwole says, there's been a lot of digitalization, registration of business and all of that. So, well, it's good news coming a second time, now officially, rather than a preliminary announcement.
Absolutely. It's certainly a very welcoming development, but you're right when you said, Tundun, that we do need to look at the fact that there's a long road ahead. There are only 2 African countries from sub-Saharan Africa that are making the top 50. And that means that we still have a long way to go. But it's good to see that the Ease of Doing Business 2020 framework plan is actually something that's working, because often what we have is situations where we have frameworks that we're discussing for years and years, but we're not seeing them actually working. Now we're seeing the Ease of Doing Business plan actually working. And that's very, very hopeful for a lot of Nigerians. So congratulations to Mrs. Oduwole and her entire team, actually. And yeah, I'm really happy about this.
And of this time next year, there are no reversals because border closure that has happened now was not captured in this report. I hope we don't find ourselves, slipping back down.
In fact, talking about Africa, the report clearly indicated that there are challenges in Africa. Yes, 2 out of sub-Saharan African countries at the top. The 20 bottom, on the list, they are all from Africa. And what are the challenges? The challenges identified by the World Bank, in fact, include trading across borders, which is something that contradicts the whole idea of both regional and continental integration. Yeah. Another flaw identified in sub-Saharan Africa is the payment of taxes, how it takes up to 96 hours to be able to even get the process started. And then, of course, the other challenge is electricity, across sub-Saharan Africans. So it's a report that is relevant not just to Nigeria, but other African countries and the contradictions in the attempt to integrate.
Okay, so Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari and Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday in Sochi, Russia, signed agreements on military cooperation, oil and gas, and rail development on the sidelines of the ongoing Russia-Africa Summit. Both leaders also agreed on the advancement of ongoing projects for establishment of a nuclear power plant in Nigeria, with Putin submitting that the next step in the implementation of the project would be the commencement of the construction of a power plant. A statement by presidential spokesman Malam Garba Shehu said both men agreed to put Nigeria-Russia relations on a fast track and pursue the completion of partially completed and abandoned projects initiated by both countries. Now, when you hear abandoned projects, Russia, Nigeria, the first place your mind goes to is Ajaokuta Steel Rolling Mill. And it was announced last month by the Minister for Steel and Minerals, architect Olalekan Adegbite, that Russia is coming back to Nigeria. The abandoned project is going to be restarted with a new Russian company, and it's now been officialized. As you were saying, sometimes it's not necessarily fresh news. It's been announced before, but now it's sort of more official because there are presidents involved. So there's that, which I'm hoping will be good news. But I'm a bit worried about the fast-tracking of this new romance. I'm not sure what it entails. We'll hear more about that from our guest, Professor Akinteriwa.
Well, we said it yesterday that Russia is showing a greater interest in Africa. This is the first Russia-Africa summit, I think, to develop a framework for cooperation and partnership with African countries. We mentioned Zimbabwe, which signed a diamond collaboration with Russia. We talked about Rwanda, which has been able to do a nuclear partnership deal with Russia. And then, of course, Nigeria. I think the key thing, is that President Buhari attended the Russia-Africa summit and is able to renew, dialogue, with the Russian government. It's not just about, abandoned projects. The abandoned projects involving Russia, there are two. Yes, Ajaokuta Steel. But there is also the Aluminium Smelter Company in Ikorabasi, in Akwa Ibom State, which was also discussed. Alcon, it is called. That was being handled by a Russian company, and President Buhari called on President Putin to see how, that can be taken up again. And then, of course, Ajaokuta, which is a very popular one, how government-to-government cooperation can be deployed to make that happens. Then in 2016, Nigeria had signed a joint cooperation agreement with Russia, under which there were 40 agreements. Part of the discussion is to see how that can be activated. And then, of course, gas, managing our gas resource, partnership between Nigeria and Gazprom. And then, of course, in the oil sector, how Nigeria can partner, with Lukoil. Of course, there is no way a Nigerian president will meet with another president and there will not be discussion of oil. And then, of course, there's some talk about potassium, which is available in large quantity in Russia, and how there can be partnership in that regard with regard to fertilizer production. And then one of the issues that was discussed, of course, was security, Boko Haram. And President Putin said that, in fact, in the last year, 2,000 Islamic State fighters joined Boko Haram, which is a confirmation of what we've heard.
Literally.
That, look, the Boko Haram issue is not domestic. And that, there are international players that have joined, and that was confirmed by President Putin during that meeting. And he should know, given his background and his position. And then, of course, there was a lot of talk about wheat production, how the Russians can assist Nigeria with, with wheat production. I think it's a good development that Russia is looking towards Africa, Africa being the last frontier, as it were. Japan, China, everybody coming to Africa.
For me, I'm just glad it's not about oil. We're actually diversifying our economy. Yes.
We should go on break now. Commercial break. We'll be right back, and the conversation will continue.
Good morning. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We continue with the news headlines. Following the renewed xenophobic attacks on Nigerians in South Africa, the federal government has restated its commitment to ensure implementation of the early warning signal mechanisms recently signed between both countries in South Africa as part of the efforts to curb xenophobic attacks. It was reported on Tuesday that South African citizens had resumed xenophobic attacks against Nigeria living in the Mpumalanga area of the country. However, the chairman, Nigerians in the Diaspora Commission, NIDCOM, Abike Dabiri-Erewa, in a statement issued on Wednesday by NIDCOM's head of media unit, Abdulrahman Balogun, insisted that the Consul General in South Africa, Godwin Adama, was on top of the situation. Dabiri-Erewa noted that the developments at this stage will be taken up at the ministerial level between the two ministers of foreign affairs of both countries. So there's no need to escalate it to presidential level, I imagine is what she's saying. It's just unfortunate that this has happened so soon after that visit, that sort of olive branch that was extended to South Africa by Nigeria, and it has just been really thrown back in our faces. Yeah.
Well, when you say early warning mechanisms, I think that for the purpose of public education, maybe the Diaspora Office Commission, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, would need to explain what it means because, sometimes you just hear these terms, early warning signal mechanism, early warning signals, or maybe when Professor Akinteruwa comes on the program, he will be able, to explain it, he being a diplomat. But I think that what is heartwarming about this is the fact that, the Commission is telling us that the High Commission is on top of the matter and that the Consul General in the Nigerian High Commission in South Africa is already engaging the South African authorities. Now, part of that engagement will be to insist that the South African authorities should ensure that the perpetrators of these regular attacks. Last week we had one, a week later we had another one, Nigerians being involved. Now, if those persons are not brought to book, if their impunity is tolerated, then we will not be wrong to continue to accuse the South African authorities of condoning criminality and misconduct on the part of its citizens. So, the Nigerian government speaking up very quickly and intervening, I think, is something that will gladden the hearts of all Nigerians, both at home and in South Africa. Because, unless you have this kind of citizen-driven diplomacy, many Nigerians abroad would, as many feel truly, that they have been abandoned by their country.
And some say that diplomacy never ends. And my question still remains, at what point do we actually take a step back and understand that these diplomatic approaches are clearly not having an effect on the South African people? The attacks are going to continue. And that is just a fact of the matter. Unless we start to take the bull by the horn, like I said yesterday, and take harsher and stronger measures against the country, that's the only way I see this stopping.
What do we do? I mean, if you say there's never a time diplomacy can fail, because we live in a world that is interdependent. We have to continue to dialogue. We have to continue to promote the policy of constructive engagement. The only option we have will be perhaps to declare war against South Africa, and that's not part of the equation.
Are you saying that because South Africa just took delivery of nukes from Russia?
No.
Are you worried?
No, I'm just saying that diplomacy, is the oil that drives, international, relations. Absolutely. And we cannot give up at any particular time. Yeah. I know as a Nigerian you feel concerned,
It's more than just concern. It's actually just outrage.
One attack is one too many. It's completely unacceptable. Now, as Nigeria prepares for governorship elections in Bayelsa and Kogi states next month, a former chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, Professor Atahiru Jega, has warned that Nigerians are losing confidence in the electoral process. Jega said the loss of confidence had resulted in declining voter turnout since 1999, when Nigeria returned to civil rule. He also warned that if care was not taken, the prediction of the United States Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, on the disintegration of Nigeria would come to pass. He attributed the low turnout of voters during elections to lack of trust, adding that majority of registered voters in the past election cycle did not vote. The former INEC chairman also said the country had witnessed some reversals in the progress it made during the 2015 elections he conducted. Well, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would disagree with his assessment. The voter turnout was low. There was a lack of trust in the process. There was a lack of trust that people's lives would be guaranteed, because there was a lot of fear. We saw awful scenes, people being attacked, people being killed in the process of trying to carry out their civil duties. So I think this is a timely warning. I don't see a lot of blame necessarily. It's just a warning that November 16th prevents a new opportunity to sort of strengthen our democracy and have a good, free, fair, credible elections in Kogi and Bayelsa State.
Well, Professor Atahiru Jega made this statement at a conference organized in Abuja to mark 20 years of democracy by Tell magazine. And although he raised the poster, he himself, provided explanation. And he offered three basic explanations. One, lack of trust. Nigerians no longer trust the electoral process. They believe that it will be manipulated. And this is why, in recent elections, we have seen that there is more emphasis on money, benefit, profit, business, rather than choice, making an informed choice, a responsible choice. Second, he cited the threat of Boko Haram and insecurity and the damage that the general state of insecurity in the country has done, to voter turnout. Now, three, he pointed out also the postponement of elections, resulting in voter apathy. And indeed, we saw this in the 2019 election. Once you postpone the election, the people tend to lose interest. They begin to come up with all kinds of conspiracy theories. And he provided the percentages. In 2015, we had, in 1999, we had a voter turnout of 52.3%. Now, that increased in 2003 to about 67%. And then, it continued to decline progressively, 57% in 2007, 53% in 2011, 44% in 2015. By 2019, it had gone down to 37%. So, and Professor Jega, having served as the chair of the Electoral Commission, obviously knows what he's talking about because he provided the statistics. But as you have said, we have, there's a litmus test for the Independent Electoral Commission in November, when it conducts the Bayelsa and Kogi elections. And the present chairman of the Electoral Commission has been promising, has been reassuring every one of us that, INEC has learned some lessons from what happened in the 2019 general elections. And we should expect better performance in Kogi and Bayelsa states. And that going forward, INEC will push for further reforms. But of course, beyond all of this, what is important is deepening the integrity of the electoral system in Nigeria. Because Professor Jega also pointed out that since 2015, there have been a lot of reversals. And I think that that's a courageous thing for him to say. Because ordinarily, if you have held a position, Nigerians tend to restrain themselves from criticizing their successors. But he came out boldly to say, look, there is a lot that has gone wrong that needs to be corrected. And I hope that, the present chairman of the Electoral Commission will take that criticism in absolute good faith.
I mean, I agree with a lot of the things that Professor Jega said, but I don't think I agree that INEC have learned from the 2019 elections at all. Because every single INEC representative that we've had come on the show since that period in time seems not to really understand what the problem is here. And it actually just seems as though INEC are not actually trying to strengthen their institution, don't understand that they're an independent institution, and don't understand how responsible they are for the lives of Nigerians. And I think until, like you're right, they actually do start to deepen the integrity of their institution, everything else is watered down completely. INEC have serious, serious, serious problems. Do I have hope? and faith in their systems ahead of the Kogi and Bayelsa elections? Not really, to be honest with you. When I asked whether they would be looking at trying to introduce technology, seeing as he said that they're having talks on technology, and this was the chairman on education, that they're having talks on the introduction of technology, he said, well, you know, we're open to ideas. And it's like, you guys are actually not even trying to implement things for yourself. You're waiting for the public to come and tell you what they think you should be doing. So I'm not hopeful, unfortunately, but I really and truly do hope that the one thing they take seriously is the deepening of their integrity as an institution, because they are independent and they need to start understanding their responsibility.
The other leg of Professor Jega's submission was that he pointed out that in 2015, the CIA had warned, you know, that's the US CIA, had warned that Nigeria could disintegrate, you know, after the election. And he said, well, we should be mindful of that. Nigeria did not disintegrate in 2015, but, you know, that he thinks that the signs are getting worse. And, you know, that's one reason why we should make sure that, you know, we take our elections seriously, take our democracy seriously, because you never know. And we've seen how the mismanagement of the democratic process has led to a crisis in other countries. We hope that won't happen in Nigeria.
We certainly do. And your point about self-justification while talking to the media and the public, I do hope that that's where it ends. And when they have their meetings, they tell themselves the cold, hard truth about the situation. I do hope so. Now, Bolivian presidential candidate Carlos Mesa is denying accusations from President Evo Morales that he's trying to organize a coup. In a video message, Mesa said the claim was not credible and said it was Morales himself who was seeking to break the constitution. He called on the international community to be vigilant, in quotes, against what he says was the prospect of a Morales-led dictatorship. Bolivia has been in political turmoil since presidential elections on Sunday. Let's take a look.
Compatriotas. My dear fellow patriots, this morning President Morales, in a message to the nation, began by speaking of a coup, and clearly he signalled at me in particular as being responsible of that supposed intention of interrupting the constitutional order. My first response is clear and categorical to that incredible accusation. It is that if something or someone has systematically broken the constitutional order of Bolivia, they are called Evo Morales.
El orden constitucional de Bolivia se llama Evo Morales. En consecuencia, y me doy por enterado,
as a consequence, and I have just learned, the indirect threat from the president and the direct threat from the government, who accuse me of inciting violence, may take us to a situation of the privation of liberty. I do not have any recourse but to continue operating in a peaceful and democratic way as the candidate that defends the legitimacy of the popular vote, and as the candidate that must legitimately be in a second round to face Mr. Evo Morales.
Debe estar en una segunda vuelta para confrontarme con el señor Evo Morales. Subrayar y agradecer a la comunidad internacional.
Underlining and thanking the international community, and ask the international community.
That's all on the news headlines.